You're listening to the No Schedule Man podcast with Kevin Bulmer, exploring real stories and lessons learned with a variety of special guests. To learn more about Kevin and to access other episodes of the podcast, please visit noscheduleman.com and connect and contribute at No Schedule Man on Twitter or Instagram and on Facebook, YouTube, and SoundCloud, all /No Schedule Man. Thanks for listening and enjoy the No Schedule Man podcast.
I've been known to struggle with reality, not that it is any real mystery.
The question today is, to whom or to what are you saying yes? Are you saying yes to yourself and the things that matter most to you in this life? Or are you saying yes to everything else and putting yourself second, third, or fourth, or worse? And how exactly are you supposed to know the difference between the two? Welcome. I'm Kevin Bulmer. Today's conversation with Tonia Adleta is really going to help with all of that. Tonia is another powerful and dynamic example of those of us who live so much of our lives trying to do everything that we really think that we're supposed to be doing, all the while unknowingly shrinking away from who we really are. The symptoms are not uncommon. It often looks like this: driving yourself into the ground, trying to keep everyone else happy. And it often results in no one being happy and you facing a total life and career makeover. That's what happened to me. That's what's happened to so many other guests on this podcast. And it happened to Tonia as well. The great news is she's a shining example of taking those lessons and framing them as an opportunity to build awareness, to learn and grow, and step by step invest in herself, what she did, to better understand what matters most so that she could create, shape, and live the life that she was meant for. If she can do it, so can you and so can I. So let's learn from Tonia's journey, and we'll all continue to grow together. Tonia Adleta is an international speaker, the founder and host of the Single Parent Summit, and the owner of multiple businesses, including an award-winning wedding. Let me try that again. An award-winning Take three. An award-winning wedding and event planning and floral design company. She describes herself as a recovering perfectionist and single mom to the two most amazing kids ever. Tonia and I believe we're kindred spirits in a lot of ways. One of the suggestions or principles that's often something I pick up that I've just never been able to accept is the idea of choosing just one thing. Like picking one lane and staying in that forever and ever amen for the rest of your life. From a marketing and a simplicity perspective, I admit I sometimes wish I was more like that, more singularly focused. Myopic is a word that comes to mind. If I were to choose just one thing and be able to dedicate my whole life to it, I bet I could be world class in that field. But I'm not wired that way. I'm too curious. I'm too creative. I have things that I'm more interested in developing than others, but I can never see myself doing just one thing. So seeing that Tonia feels and lives the same way, for me, was a real breath of fresh air. And I don't think that either one of us is trying to suggest that's what you have to do as well. But especially in this digital age, it seems that we all must be really multifaceted in our emotional maturity skill set in order to navigate the tricky waters of just the things that make up a life: relationships, friendships, work, health, parenting, recreation, and so many other things. But how do we do that? Well, part of the answer to that is addressed right off the start of the discussion that I had with Tonia. And it's one of a number of things that stood out to me from our conversation, including, number one, she suggested there's no such thing as work-life balance. There's just life, and you balance that. This was one of my favorite beginnings to any episode of this podcast so far. I thought that I'd tossed Tonia a bit of a curveball, and I was interested to see what she was going to do with it. And so I was delighted when she didn't even swing at it. I absolutely love the way that she answered the question. So rather than saying anything more about it, I'll let you listen to the episode and hear her response. It's right at the beginning of the conversation, which is coming up in just a couple of moments. Number two, mindfulness versus looking backward or looking forward. Tonia gives a terrific account of how you can tell if you're in one of two very common camps of people. The first is to evaluate if you're treating yourself like a victim. I know a lot of people in that camp. I was a part of that camp for a long, long time. This is the operating system where you feel like life is always happening to you. This will sound familiar if you find that you're always looking backwards, rehashing things from the past, carrying ill feelings with you, recycling bad memories, and basically being unwilling to let go. The other camp has you always looking forward. This one delays the thought of happiness until a certain result can be achieved. I've spent time in this camp too. Of course, the tragedy about this one is that with this operating system, you can never really get the result that you want. You're focused on pleasing everyone but yourself and having to be perfect all the time. It's a road to nowhere. It's like being a dog chasing your own tail. The solution is to get to know who you are, get to be really good with who that is, and to practice mindfulness so that you're neither looking backward or forward all the time, but enjoying the only thing that's real at this moment, which is this moment. And number 3, awareness. This has come up before. It's going to come up again. It's a key part of one of the keynote speeches I deliver. It's central as one of the 6 key pieces in a speech that Tonia delivers, and I'm going to continue to highlight this point whenever it comes up for as long as I'm doing this podcast. And the reason why is that most people, in my experience, are unaware that they are unaware. And I include myself in this right up until fairly recently. Another way of saying this is people that don't get it don't get that they don't get it. In a recent podcast episode just a couple of weeks ago with Andre Radmal, he talked about being stuck in a monologue as opposed to being open to a dialogue. The week before that, with Jerry Visca, he shared the thought, most people are unaware that they are unaware. So this has come up just within the last month. Tonia gives a great account of why this is so important, so I encourage you to listen for that, along with the other of the 6 points that she delivers partway through our discussion. Also, listen for her story about being on the floor of the bathroom when she was living in a mobile home. I'm pointing this out now because what you're about to hear is a dynamic, or I should say who you're about to hear, is a dynamic, creative, successful woman of great character. I think it's really easy to look at somebody for where they are now and then assume they've never had these moments when life has brought them to their knees. If that's something that you're going through now, know that it's not just you. It happened to me. It's happened to Tonia. But you can get through it if you choose to. And Tonia is going to give you some terrific examples of how she's done that and how you can do that too if you have to. You're going to love her. Here's the conversation with Tonia Adleta on the No Schedule Man podcast. Tonia, how would you describe for me your description of a good work-life balance?
Ooh, work-life balance happens to be one of my favorite conversations because I don't really think there is such a thing as work-life balance. My philosophy is that we have one life and therefore all of it needs to be balanced. It's not a matter of contrasting your work side and your life side. You have one life, and actually the name of my mentorship program is The Well-Lived Life because I feel very passionately about this entire idea. So I think really what it comes down to is evaluating everything that you've got going on, whether that's something in your career, it's something in your social life, if you're a parent, something that your kids have going on, really looking at all of the aspects of your life and putting it all onto the table at once, and then being able to draw those comparisons and see if you've got something, maybe you're a little overcommitted over here, maybe this area needs some more development, and really be able to put everything on the table all at once.
No such thing as a work-life balance. You win for one of my favorite things that I've heard in the podcast so far, Tonia. I've had my back up with some people. We may get into this, but I've read some things on your website where you talk about what if the gurus got it wrong. And there's one in particular whom I like, but will also state balance is baloney. But his version of that is more winners drive themselves harder than everybody else. And
I have a feeling I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah, and I just, I say, okay, well, you're asking me to be the hare instead of the tortoise, and we know that doesn't work. So you're not saying balance doesn't work. You're saying, you're asking me, Kevin, work and life aren't separate. It's balance over your whole, the whole thing's got to fit under life.
Absolutely. Yeah, I tend to take the approach of the idea that I am a holistic fill in the blank. So holistic meaning both encompassing everything and whole, really playing off of the word of holistic. So if I am a holistic entrepreneur, it means that my business structure, my workflows, my client interaction, my deliverables, all of those things fit within the balance of the context of the rest of my life. So nothing that I'm doing, theoretically, as long as I'm doing my job to balance it all, then nothing is necessarily overshadowing something else. And I'll say this with a caveat. It doesn't mean that you lose the idea of seasons. I think seasons are incredibly important when it comes to this idea of a centered life, of a well-lived life. So for example, I have 2 teenagers. As they go into school in the fall, I'll have one as a freshman and one as a sophomore. I know that this season of my life with them is very, very precious to me. So I tend to think of things with the idea of I only have 3 years left. So I'm going to make choices that are different because I want to be intentional about my parenting, maximizing those last 3 years that we have while they're in high school, that maybe I wouldn't have made the same decisions, 5, 6, 7 years ago. So it's, again, that idea of dumping everything onto the table, kind of rifling through the mess of your life, and then pulling back and saying, okay, this is what my reality currently is. What is it that I really want it to be? And then we simply reverse engineer that. I know it sounds simplistic, but, there's so many moving pieces to what we do.
In order to reverse engineer, though, you've got to think forward about where you want to be and also evaluate where you are presently. And I can't speak for you, but I know that's an ability that I only acquired fairly recently within the context of my life. And I don't mean to generalize, Tonia, but I would suggest that most people that I've observed don't even necessarily really do that. Look forward, I mean. What you've got to do if you want to be able to work it backwards.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And what I find interesting is that you tend to fall in one of 2 camps, with the idea of if you have almost like that victimhood, type of mentality of life happens to me, 9 times out of 10, you're looking backwards. If you have the workaholic or the people pleaser or the perfectionist, you tend to live in the forward, into the future of, I can't enjoy my life until I reach this level of accomplishment. What I find so interesting is that what we're really talking about in a lot of these different avenues is mindfulness to bring us to the present moment. But what's really fun is when you get to dig into that deeper level and say, okay, up to this point, here's how my mind has reacted to things. Here's how I have handled situations. So you dig really deep into that self-awareness. You get into the ownership, the responsibility, the gratitude. And then I think in that process is where you get your feet kind of under you, where you're really able to stand in the moment with a hopeful eye towards the future. And you can really start to then have those expectations, have the hopes and the dreams of saying, all right, I understand where I've come from. Now I can look to the future and say, this is where I want to go, and this is how I'm going to get there.
People-pleasing and perfectionism. That word perfectionist jumped right out at me from what you just said, because I was meaning to, and I'm going to now, Tonia, haul you back. So we can, what's coming here now, I suspect, so that we can give some context, because I think it's important for people that are listening to know, and I'm sure this was going to flesh out anyway, but as opposed to just coming out and delivering all these potential solutions, I, for one, pay a lot more attention when I know somebody has been able to overcome a challenge, has been able to develop a certain level of awareness about where they are, realize maybe that they're stuck or that life isn't working for them the way that they'd really like it to, and then what they've done to then become unstuck and move forward and then reach out as you are now to help others. So maybe you can pick this up, even though I haven't really asked you a question. I'm betting you know what it is, but I'm just going to leave you with the word perfectionist, and then maybe you can take it from there.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so I have a pretty good idea where you're headed, and I may take it even a step further than what you're already thinking in your mind.
Please.
So first of all, I will say that I have the trifecta of the people-pleasing, the workaholism, I can never say that word quite right. And the perfectionism. Those are three mindsets, behavior types, like whatever you want to call them, personality traits. I have embodied all three of those for the vast majority of my life, even as a young child. So do I think that I have arrived out of those? Absolutely not. It is literally a daily struggle for me, sometimes hourly, to be able to do the good work that's in front of me and not be thinking about either the rest of the work I have to do, what other people might think, or how to get it all just right, and rather just get it done and get it out in the world. So kind of a side, little rabbit trail over into that segment. But I think maybe where you wanted me to go was this idea that I am the twice divorced wedding planner. And there's definitely some irony in this idea. Coming from the wedding industry, being in this space where we are in love all the time, we are creating memories around love, and then here I am having attempted twice and not so much. So it's a very interesting balance, again, kind of hearkening back to the idea of the perfectionism and who am I as a person? Where is my value outside of the role that I fill? All of these things kind of get tossed into the mix when you're really starting to unpack who you are and why you are the way that you are. So there's a lot of different directions we could go with that.
Well, let's start with this one, the trifecta that you mentioned, that you sound like you've got a pretty good awareness of it's something that you've got to be reframing on a daily, maybe even hourly or minutely basis even. But tell me what life was like for you when you came to that realization of, oh, gee, this is something that I'm going to have to, I'm going to say confront, but that's not the word I want, but certainly do something about. What was going on in your life when you finally felt that way?
I think there were a couple of different points along the way. One of the things that I've come to really appreciate about the journey that I've experienced is the idea that I still have a choice to make, that I can choose to disavow the lure of being a victim. So for me, in my world, that looks like, the gossip. It looks like the complaining. It looks like the idea of saying that, oh, life is so hard and here's how all these bad things keep happening to me. It doesn't mean that I don't experience bad things, but it means that I have reframed how I look at them. And you can ask anyone in my daily world, they will sometimes joke that like, okay, where's the silver lining in this one, Tonia? Because I'm always going to find it. It might take me a little while. I might have to really work hard at it, but inevitably I will find some good in every situation. And a lot of that came through the experience of, being divorced, not only, again, once, but twice, but then also raising my kids in that same experience. I remember our first Christmas after their dad and I had separated, and I had no idea how this was all going to work out, how the day-to-day life part was going to work. And I remember opening my screen door and there was a Christmas card with a gift card to Walmart for $500. And of course, I immediately devolved into tears and, never did find out who was responsible for that. In that moment, there was something within me that the pride in me wants to say, I don't need this, I can figure it out, I can make it work. But then on the flip side of that, there is that very quick realization of just being so humbled that someone wants to make a difference in your world and wants to provide care for you without having any expectation for anything, even a gratitude, in response. So with that idea and that kind of experience, I was then able, during kind of my rebuilding phase, if you will, to recognize that it didn't matter how rough things were for us. There was always something that we could do for someone else. There was always someone who was in a worse position. And I'm sorry, I'm going to take us one more place in this conversation as far as this is concerned. But I remember when my kids were really young, let's call it maybe 4 and 5, 5 and 6, somewhere in this range. We were very soon after the divorce and we're trying to find our new normal. And I remember one of them, I'm not even sure which one it was at this point. I think it was my son. he was kind of complaining. He was getting a little whiny, and he was complaining that he was hungry. And he wasn't just hungry, he was starving. Well, what you may not know is that he chose to not eat the dinner that I had provided for him. So this was part of me needing to learn how to be the tough mom and not just be the fun one so that I would win favor with them, but to set those boundaries. And also at the same time, I didn't want to raise kids that were entitled to think that their lives were the most important thing in the world. Yes, they are important human beings in and of themselves, but they are a piece of our bigger puzzle. So I did the kind of the guilt trip thing, I will admit, but we did a Google search and we said, okay, let's, if you're going to tell me that you're starving, then let's really look at what it means to starve. And we looked at images of children who were starving. And in that conversation with my son, he actually had just a much more deeper impact with it. They had a fundraiser coming up just right after that at their school, that they were raising money for a sister property in Africa to bring in clean water. And he actually went to his teacher the next day and said, hey, I saw these pictures and we need to do something about these kids and how can we help? So something within him changed in that experience. So it's something that, is very at the forefront of my mind when it comes to parenting, that there's this idea that doesn't matter how bad things might be, there's always something that we can do, even if it's just something as simple as smiling at someone, meeting their eye, wishing them a good day and really meaning it. Those are small little things that we can do to practice hospitality and to bring happiness into other people's lives that have nothing to do with how much money we need to make that all work.
Which marriage were your kids from?
My first marriage.
I'm betting that made the second marriage even more of a rodeo.
Oh, yes. Very insightful. The funny thing is that the second marriage only lasted about 6 months. And so people would assume that, it didn't teach me as much. And I would argue with that and say that was actually the exact opposite.
How?
I think one of the biggest things is knowing who I was. There was a point in my first marriage really early on. We were newlyweds. My then husband had bypassed his senior year of college to go right into grad school. I had already graduated and undergrad, and I was working as a special events coordinator for Fox Family Channel, and that's now Disney Family. So, pretty great job, especially straight out of college. We were on our way to go meet all of his grad friends. I was meeting them for the first time. And, here we are, newlywed, bright-eyed, ready to take on the future. I'm in my dream job. We've got this beautiful condo that we bought, happily married, but I'm desperately lonely. So clearly, if we just have friends, that's all we need, right? This is going to be fantastic. So I'm all excited about this, and we're on our way to the restaurant. We're crossing the street. I remember exactly where this all happened. And he says, you're kind of intimidating in business settings and in social settings. So I'm just going to need you to pull that back a bit because these are my friends. And, I don't want you to step on my toes here. It was one of those things that the sentence, now looking back, of course I get all up in arms about it now, but then in that moment, coming from the environment that I'd been raised in, the religious conditioning, to be honest, that was part of that whole thing, my immediate reaction without even thinking was, okay, honey, whatever you need. And it wasn't even something that I really processed until years later. So when I finally did, and I can finally look back and say, that moment right there, I chose to shrink back from who I am. I chose to be quiet. I chose to withdraw and not be fully myself in order to, make that work for him. Whether that was the right choice or the wrong choice, it's something that I can identify as I can take responsibility for this, and I chose what eventually I think became the wrong choice in the sense of providing and protecting that marriage. So, there are 1,000 of things that we could blame the responsibility of the marriage ending on, but for me, I can say that's where I was wrong. And to be able to have that conversation with him and say, I know we're years down the road now, but I did you a disservice by agreeing to this and to not show up in that capacity, and I'm sorry for that. So that was a very interesting conversation. Now, contrast that to the second marriage, and we are now in the pastor's office, and this is the church that I've been a part of for 10 years. They actually helped me through the first divorce, and were incredibly influential and very helpful and supportive in that. And my second husband has kind of laid things out so that the reason why the marriage isn't working is because I have chosen my business over our blended family. So this is the way he's structured, his argument to the pastor. So the pastor says to me, if God were asking you to give up your business in order to save your marriage, would you? And it was everything I could do to even stay seated in this office because my blood was just pumping through my veins. And I just had this almost like other type of, not so much like out of body type experience, but just definitely that idea of full conviction of the words that I was speaking. And I very quickly and confidently said back, God would never ask that of me because he's the one who's given me the ability to do what I'm doing and has allowed me to create the business that I have. So just even in and of that self, your question is unfounded. Something about this isn't making sense to me. For me to be able to stand up for myself, to stand up for my decision in that moment, that didn't happen 10 years ago in this other conversation. So the question is a very long answer, and I apologize for that, but it's really the idea of the juxtaposition of who I was in marriage 1 and who I was in marriage 2. I had grown so much in that post-divorce number 1 standpoint that by the time things started to fall apart in divorce number 2, I saw what it was for what it was, and I wasn't about to take any of it.
You mentioned about the environment that you were raised in and religious conditioning. Can you tell me a little bit more about those two things and how that shaped you into the young woman that was in that moment that you described about shrinking from who you were in the first marriage? But just to give a little bit of context to this growth, take me back, if you would, about that environment. That you mentioned it, so I'm guessing that there's some meat on that bone there that could maybe be explored if you're willing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, I don't think you even know this yet, but there is a podcast in the works that will be happening most likely later this fall. That is the Recovering Church Girls podcast that I'm co-hosting with a dear, dear friend of mine as we started comparing notes, of kind of what it was like to either grow up in or have a long-term relationship with conservative religious beliefs or the organizations themselves, all the different, not only belief systems, but the expectations, the stereotypes. There's a reason why a lot of these stereotypes exist. So that's going to be a very interesting project. And already it's getting a lot of really fun traction because these are conversations that need to happen. In my experience, I had a great childhood. I'm an only child. I still have a fantastic relationship with my with my parents. We moved around a lot. So there's, an upside and a downside there, but I don't regret any of that. So this is definitely, kind of that first world problem type of perspective in the sense that it's not like I was in physical danger or that I was being caused, sort of that occult level, type of damage. So I want to be really clear and say, first of all, that I'm incredibly grateful for so many of the good things that I did learn and experience. But then secondly, to again, provide that context of, I'm not saying this is all bad. So with that, as kind of the disclaimer, the environment that I grew up in was very, let's say, rules heavy. The idea of the expectations were very clear. It was a very patriarchal bend to the society. So the conversation about making your own choices was very limited. The expectations were such that, we were the rules religion. So it was, we don't drink, we don't dance, we don't smoke, we don't go out with the boys who do any of those things. As a matter of fact, we don't go out with the boys at all. All of that kind of thing. So it was a very restrictive place. It was safe, in terms of physical danger type safe, But I think it really set up the experience then to your point, to your question. I wasn't practiced in communicating my own thought process, or in defending myself, or in having that value system that I, in and of myself, had value to offer in this relationship. And my parents valued me greatly. And as a matter of fact, my senior year in high school, I kind of sort of led a sit-in rebellion at my private little Christian school. I had been public schooled all through 8th grade. I was homeschooled freshman through junior. And then I really wanted a senior year, something to look back on. So I convinced my parents to let me go to this private Christian school my senior year. And it was a total waste of time and money, but that's beside the point. In this, the school administration decided to fire our homeroom teacher, who I had become very close with. As a parent now, I understand the school board's decision. However, in that moment, being all of, 17, I am filled with injustice on his behalf. So again, I'm the one that led this whole sit-in rebellion thing. We had a petition going around, the whole 9 yards. The principal calls my parents and basically says, you've got to control your daughter. She is off the rails here, and you now need to come into the principal's office because she is unruly. So my parents came in once, and my dad made it absolutely clear that any concern that the president or the principal needed to address was going to be with me directly, because I was completely capable of making my own decisions as an independent thinker and following through with them. So I had their complete support and their backing. So again, I want to be careful to say, to give context for that. That's how I was raised at home. Then when you continue that time and time again, I was the poster child for the youth group. I would go on the missions trips and the fundraising types of efforts. So I was always held up as this example that should be followed. And yet at the same time, I was completely stifled by the societal elements of growing up in that church environment. So, 2-3 years down the road, and I'm now in college. I've been an RA for 2 years. Again, a lot of really wonderful things and some things that were really tricky. That's kind of how I walked in to the idea of marriage, not to mention the American version of, all the stars aligning, the romance of it all, the idea that this person is supposed to complete who I am. Heaven forbid that I'd be responsible for my own growth, my own development as a person. So there's a lot of moving pieces to that question. And I apologize. I feel like I am talking your ear off on the topic. Clearly, I feel very passionately about it.
No, there's no need for, no need for apology at all. And I really appreciate you giving some context to that. There's a word that I've actually written down listening to you that's coming out, and that's absolutes. Absolutes don't seem to resonate with Tonia Adleta. Where we started off, where I asked about work-life balance, is it work or is it life? And no. And then that was one area where I was cheering for you. And another time was when you were telling the story about being in that meeting room with your second husband at the time and being asked, is it the blended family or the businesses? And I thought, here you've been given another absolute, and I'm silently over here with my fist in the air when you somehow wiggled into a third way that was an option. It wasn't an option, but a trap door with no, God would never ask me that. And I'm just, I'm listening, but I'm going, yes. But so there are absolutes, black, white, work, life, yes, no. That doesn't resonate with you, does it?
Not so much. And it's funny because the more training that I'm doing within myself and really going after some of these bigger, deeper, twistier questions, one of the first things I thought of when you mentioned this yes or no idea is, believe it or not, from improv training. The very first rule of improv is the concept of yes and. So to give it context for, being actually, let's say that we're doing an improv stage together, an improv production, it's the idea that I see you out on the stage and I see that you are demonstrating that you're slicing vegetables on the counter. So by my actions and by my words, I'm going to say yes and add to that scene. So I'm not going to come in and try and argue with you about what you're doing. I'm going to see it. I'm going to, kind of mentally say, yes, this is what he's doing. And here's how I can add to that of, hey, Kevin, can you hand me the carrot? I can't reach it. It's on your side. Or, whatever the case might be. But this concept of yes and has pretty much revolutionized my world in the sense of like it sets you up to find the common ground and to build something and to co-create something with the people that you're in conversation with and in relationship with, as opposed to trying to defend or hunker down into your own thought process or beliefs or ideals.
I'm astounded that you mentioned the improv. I wonder if you've ever read Blink by Malcolm Gladwell.
I believe I have. I have a very bad habit of starting like 17 books over the course of a month or two, and I never actually finish any of them. Maybe, with the exception of one or two, but I'm pretty sure I've read at least a very good section of that one.
Here's why I'm mentioning it. I read it years ago and remember that I liked it, and I've been going through the audio book version of it, like literally. Today I was driving around, and he was describing a section of it that I remembered reading before, but an improv group called Mother. I can't remember exactly where they were around the United States, but the group was called Mother. And it was talking about how there's a rule in the improv of that you don't say no to whatever a scenario is, that it's amazing to watch people out there on the high wire that looks really dangerous, and we couldn't imagine ourselves in that situation, but it only falls apart when somebody is not willing to, as you just put it, answer it with yes and. So it's funny, little Twilight Zone music going off for me, which really does absolutely nothing at all for somebody who's listening, unless they think, oh, that's neat that they were both thinking the same thing on the same day. And now I'm really reaching. But I mentioned the absolutes in that I sort of feel like a lot of us maybe reach for those because it's easy to fool ourselves into thinking that there's safety there. And so to use the improv analogy, we could sit there as the audience in our absolutes and be terrified of what the people up on the stage are doing, when in fact there actually is a bit of a methodology to it, but it requires being open to possibility and trusting yourself. How fair an assessment would you think that is to offer?
I would say that is 100% accurate. And I'd even probably take it a little bit further. I've had the great fortune of working with a fantastic improv coach in my training as a public speaker, as a professional speaker. And I distinctly remember when he felt that I was playing a scene too safe. And he would literally be standing next to me. It's just a small workshop. There's maybe 10 or 12 people in the room, and these are all dear friends of mine that we've been in this process together. So I am emotionally safe. I'm in a safe place. And yet, he'll be standing next to me saying like, okay, try that again, go deeper, and just giving me whatever direction I need in that moment. One of the things that we talk about in the course of being a professional speaker is to be in the moment, to feel all of the emotions that we're talking about. I'm not just telling you a story. I am reliving the experience. So when I'm telling you that my blood was boiling and here's what I said, I feel all of that all over again. And that is something that it's an incredibly important piece of being able to connect with people. It's not just about when we're on stage and having that kind of stage presence. I'm not talking about the performance element. I'm talking about humans connecting with humans.
I want to ask you about how some of the pieces of the puzzle that is Tonia Adleta have come together, but I'm going to and I'm going to let you off these rocks here in just a moment, but one more time I'd like to take us back in between the first I was to say, in between the first two marriages, as if to suggest that you're going to pile on a whole bunch more. You call me in a few more years when you've racked up another 3 or 4, so you've got some more material.
Yeah, exactly. We can go at this again.
Yeah, not the best way that I've ever phrased a question, but in the
no problem.
But
I mean, once you call yourself the twice divorced wedding planner, you got to kind of be okay with wherever that's going to go.
Here's where I was trying to go with it was. You had that moment that you described in the beginning of your first marriage where you felt like you shrank from who you really were. But by the time the second marriage came around, you had that moment where you chose differently when a situation that was somewhat similar presented itself to you again. what happened between the first time and that second instance, or what series of things began to happen to help you start to transform to be able to decide differently as you did?
Okay, you've hit yet another one of my favorite topics, because the process, the journey, I think is so incredibly, it was impactful for me, but not just for me, more so for my kids. Everything about how I parent changed as a result of the experience that I went through. And not only that, I think just even as a business owner, what I was willing to accept as, kind of my business goals, my objectives have changed dramatically over this whole process. So I'm going to do two things. One is I'm going to give you a short, quick answer that isn't an answer at all. And then I will give you an overview of the real answer. So the short, quick answer that's not really an answer is an invitation to check us out at thesingleparentsummit.com. And the reason why I say that is because my opening keynote for the summit is the full version of the answer to this question. I go deep and personal in the sense of here's where I was, here's how I got through, here's what changed. So personally, I have 6 elements that I have identified as being absolutely foundational to me making this transformation.
Let me stop you right there for just a second. Is it the singleparentsummit.com or singleparentsummit.com?
It is the singleparentsummit.com.
Okay, and of course I'll post that along with the show notes and for this episode and whatnot. But okay, just wanted to make sure that we had that right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry for interrupting you. Please continue.
No. And I'm sure we'll talk about this again later, but just as a side note, the idea of the Single Parent Summit, it is not to the exclusivity of that if you're not a single parent, you're not welcome. Everything that we're talking about is completely transferable to any parent. We are just coming from a place of we want to serve the underserved, those of us that are right there in that place right now of the single parent, because we have a different set of criteria that we have to work with than a 2-parent family. So whether you are a parent or single or partnered or whatever, you can still learn a vast amount of information from this group. So we'll get to that later. But the longer answer that actually gives you real content is the 6 pieces. So for me, that was self-awareness, ownership, gratitude, clarity, tenacity, and community. And I dig into each of these in far more detail. But again, as I mentioned earlier, it was that the very first piece is self-awareness. And once you are fully aware of who you are, why you do the things you do, what it is that you're doing, then that leads you automatically to the place where you have the opportunity to take ownership. If you choose not to take ownership, then you're basically saying, I choose not to grow. So you can stay in that victim space. You can stay in the martyr space if you so choose. However, if you take ownership for your actions, for who you are, for how you think, and then you recognize that you have infinite power to make changes and to create things, that's a game changer. And for me, probably the biggest piece was really getting into this, I call it the quicksand of gratitude, because even now, nothing will ground me more effectively and faster than practicing gratitude will. So I can still get up all in my headspace, like we were talking about earlier, get caught up in the workaholism, get caught up in the people-pleasing, seeking approval thing. But when I practice gratitude, it brings me back down to earth, and it helps me have the perspective of the long game. And it makes it so that I'm able to be more in the moment and intentional in what I'm doing. So the next piece of that, then we get into clarity. For me, I feel like clarity creates possibility. Until you know what you want, you have no idea how to get it. So when you can get crystal clear, again, on who you are, where you've come from, and then where you're going, then things really start to shift. And you have, again, a whole new level of power available to you from that creative space. However, it doesn't come easily, hence the fact that the next piece is tenacity. you have to be able to have some stick-to-itiveness, some not so much aggression, but at the same time that power, that drive that allows you to stay the course. And it's a tricky thing because I believe strongly in the idea of both the masculine power and the feminine power. I have always, up to this point in my life, come from a masculine type of perspective where it's I have to strive, I have to drive, I have to work hard, I have to hustle more. And, this kind of references what we were talking about earlier with that particular guru in mind. It was always, our self-driven piece. Whereas I really think that what's happening, there's a shift that's going on, and the idea that if we can be clear about what it is that we want to create and we can hold on to that idea without holding on so tightly to the how it's done, but this idea of this is what I want to experience and I'm open to what that unfolds to be, that's really just a beautiful place to be in, of allowance and of grace and allowing a certain amount of vulnerability in that. But even then, it requires tenacity. And then finally, the last piece is community. And I think that there is something so powerful in recognizing that you have the authority as to whether or not to allow someone to be on the advisory board of your life. It's up to you to choose who you listen to. So if you've got, the neighbor or the family member or whomever who's got that negative Nelly, voice thing going in your head, that's up to you to allow them that space. Or to say, this behavior isn't serving me, this relationship isn't serving me, how can we change this? And sometimes there are toxic relationships and they've just got to go. There's no other way around it. But I think when you can get into that space of the community that allows for combined grace and combined growth, again, there is this whole nother level of power and possibility that comes into play when you have that type of community in your life.
I'm interested at where some of this framework came from. I took a deep breath because I was trying to decide which of the 3 or 4 questions I have loaded up here for you I wanted to ask first. But I'm going to take you back again to that moment with your first husband, where I would suggest, and these might even have been words that you used, Tonia, that you didn't yet really know who you were. So at that point, otherwise you would have answered the question differently and you wouldn't have shrunk from that occasion, which tells me that you weren't yet able to get past the first of the 6 pieces at that moment. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it is. I think I had ideals. I had ideas of who I wanted to be, but I was 24. I didn't know very much yet. And up to that point, I'd been living out other people's expectations for me. And I hadn't really gotten to know myself yet.
See, and I think it's so key, and it's why I've caught us here. Awareness is one of the first of the 4 character traits that I suggest in part of what I'll be sharing in the Single Parent Summit as well, that there's one key that I never had, and you can lump me in that category of being unaware that I was unaware. So, and I know a lot of people like that. What was it that helped you become aware of the fact that you weren't aware?
At the kind of the tail end of processing through the divorce from my kid's dad, I was working at Starbucks, of all places, because my corporate job didn't provide health insurance. So my typical day would be that the alarm would go off at 3:45 in the morning, and I would somehow inevitably, get distracted trying to get out the door at that ungodly hour, but I would make it. My mom would be asleep on the couch. I'd run and kiss the kids goodbye. I'm out the door. I clock in. I get to work setting up the pastries, yada, yada, yada. I work 4 hours at Starbucks, and then I would go into the bathroom, change clothes, grab a cup of coffee, run out to the corporate job, work there for 8 hours, and then hit the road again and try and race the clock to get the kids from the after school program. That was my life. Between that, and we get home and we've got groceries and laundry and kids have to run through the bath. And, then of course there's always that question from, the 5-year-old of, Mommy, when are you going to marry Daddy again? All of these kinds of things, like this is the reality of what my life looked like. So fast forward, maybe just a couple of weeks, couple of months into this process, and I was on the bathroom floor. And it's funny because I moved into a mobile home after the divorce, this gorgeous 4-story townhome, that we bought as our marital home. And now I'm in a mobile home, and there's carpet in the bathroom, this terrible hunter green carpet. And I still don't understand why anybody would carpet a bathroom, but that's beside the point. There's our little yellow dots. They're bleach stains, and they're scattered all over this green carpet. And I remember I was floating in and out of consciousness, and I'm looking at these dots, and I'm trying to figure out how to get out of the bathroom. Maybe I can just follow this path that they've created for me, and then everything will be okay. Well, next thing I know, the one dot is getting larger and larger, and it's turning white instead of yellow, and then everything is white, and I don't have to think about anything anymore because I no longer have consciousness. That's where I was. That was my wake-up moment. That was the idea of, okay, clearly this isn't working. This idea of how I'm spending my days, how I'm spending my effort, my energy. I have no time with my kids. I'm running ragged. I've got more espresso running through my veins than I ever need. What is this really all about? So that was the impetus for me to really get serious about self-awareness and to dive deeper into who I was. And there's a quote by Plato that I absolutely love. He says, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And that's always stuck out to me. Even when I was a teenager, I remember reading that and thinking like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what that's all about. But it wasn't until I hit this stage of my life where I think I really took it seriously of, okay, let's examine my life. And this takes us back to exactly where we were at the top of the hour. The idea of you dump everything in your life out on the table, sort it all out, because the unexamined life is not worth living. It doesn't mean that your life doesn't have value. It means that you are not accessing a level of possibility and intentionality if you're just simply going through the motions.
See, this brings us to one of the other things that I wrote down when you were going over your 6 pieces and actually circled. I wrote down, till you know what you want, beside clarity, and circled it because a lot of us can be really tenacious at working hard at doing the things that we think we're supposed to be doing or need to be doing. You can call it the script or American dream, Canadian dream, whatever you think it is. But it maybe never even occurs to us to stop and ask, what is it that we want when we have so many, quote, responsibilities in front of us every day that you were, I would suggest, very nobly working to, at least from a surface level to look at it, working to take care of. Clearly it wasn't serving you, at least from a physical standpoint. That's not a healthy situation. You described lovely sounding carpet, by the way. So how then did you go from losing consciousness on the bathroom floor to really beginning to put all those pieces out on the table, examining what it was that you wanted, and starting to identify what it was that you want?
Well, I think when I really started to dig deeper into that entire process, it wasn't difficult for me to determine what my 2 main pieces are. And again, this is where I go like kind of contrarian, because so much of the standard advice right now is pick one thing, focus on this one thing and don't do anything else in your life until this one thing is perfect. And again, I say hogwash, because especially as a single parent, as an entrepreneur, put those 2 together. Are you kidding me? Like, for me to only do one thing in my life, that is impossible. So anyway, going back to my 2 things, my 2 very important priorities. One was that I wanted to spend more time with my kids. I wanted to be more available to them. And the second thing was that I wanted my work to matter. I didn't want to do something that was just considered, replaceable. I didn't want to do something that could be easily farmed out to someone else. And so in that, that really is indicative of my inner search for significance in that process, because I wanted something deep and meaningful. The idea of leaving a legacy is something that had always drawn me in, even since I was a teenager. And that's probably not a normal thing for a 14-year-old to say, that they want to leave a legacy, but it's something that had always kind of stuck in my ideals of how I wanted to live my life, the kind of impact that I wanted to have. So the idea of these 2 driving forces, everything that I started to do from that point out, I would check in, every couple of months or every few weeks, whatever the time frame might be, of saying, okay, where am I? Am I closer to that being a reality in my life? Have I made any progress in these two areas? And now, several years into this, again, I mean, I took massive amounts of training, personal development, professional development. I was a conference junkie. I probably still am, but now I'm on the speaking side instead of in the audience. But the idea that, there's such value to be had in these kinds of live event trainings. But again, I often found that the advice coming from the stage just didn't always work for me. So I would take an idea here and I'd put it with an idea over here, and then I would tweak it and turn it sideways, and then it would work. So with that, that's actually how I got to be to the place of having the opportunity to create the well-lived life, because everything that I've put into this package, into this program, and the whole process is really the very practical ways of examining my life, of evaluating how I'm spending my energy, what my big goals are. One of my favorite tools is a 90-day plan. And I have mine broken down into there's a piece for friends and family. There's a piece for house and home. There's one for my financial security. There's one for each of the different businesses. I actually own 3 businesses. So there's one for each of those, both an internal and an external. So I will go through at least once a quarter, and I will set specific goals for each of those different aspects of my life, with the idea that I already have an overall arching mission for each of those things, basically just for my own life. Who am I? What am I all about? What's important to me? And then being able to use this container, then I can create things to map out the effective impact of those decisions.
I'm interested if I can ask you to take a lot of information and cram it into a short amount of time. Well, we've given a lot of background, and I think it's really important and very valuable, and I thank you for that, Tonia. But I also, before our time together is up, would like to paint a picture more of where you are now when I find you today in this conversation in June of 2017, and the transformation from what you described your life was like, getting up so early in the morning, going and working 4 hours at Starbucks, going to you said corporate job, racing home, trying to take care of the kids, to sort of where you are now. How did that start to change and manifest over the last several years?
Well, I'll tell you, as much as I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, there is nothing that will clarify your intentions about being a parent quite like all of a sudden having half of the custody time. And again, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, but, like I said earlier, I will always find the silver lining. The silver lining in this idea of being a divorced parent and now having 50% custody as opposed to 100% custody is you are very, very clear about how you want to spend that time to get the most value out of the connection with your kids. So way back when, I wouldn't even go to the grocery store when the kids were home with me because I didn't want to waste that time. I would do all the grocery shopping or whatever household maintenance there was to do when they were at their dad's. As the kids got older, it was important for them to see that, yes, I am doing it all, and that's not okay. The idea of as they got older, that they needed to take more responsibility in our family unit, in our household maintenance, the running of the household. Things just don't happen. So teaching them, this is how you set a budget. This is how you go grocery shopping. This is how you do meal planning. Here's how you make your favorite kind of dinner. All of those things, I don't know that I necessarily ever experienced that growing up myself. So, there's a transition there where it comes from being the one to do everything when they're really young, and then to empowering them to make better decisions as they get older and to take ownership for, their own process in that. The second piece I would say that is massively different is I bought a fixer-upper house. Oh my word. This thing it's been such a blessing. I am so, so grateful, but has it ever been a massive undertaking? when I tell you that there was a baby raccoon that fell from the hole in the kitchen ceiling, I'm not exaggerating. So the process of finding this home in the shape that it was in and watching my kids mature in such a way that they started taking ownership and jumping in with our different, not only the tasks that we need to do, but this idea of like, oh, mom, I'm really into this. Can I do my room based on that design? Yep, you can do your room however you want to. You just tell me what you need and we'll make it happen. Giving them responsibility, giving them choices that they could make that, again, allowed them to really hone into who each of them are as individuals, what their strengths are, and build their home environment around that. That was a pretty powerful process in and of itself as well. So straight away, those are two big things that I can say have made a massive difference from where I was then to where I am now.
How did you go from working at Starbucks in a corporate job to speaking and mentoring and event management and owner of 3 businesses? And there's a big difference from A to B.
It is. I guess it is, isn't it? It's funny because I just haven't really thought about it because to me it feels like it's just life. And I mean, that's a big part of it. It's life. It's taking risks when other people advise me not to, from that corporate job. And within the context of a year, not even a year, we separated. The divorce was finalized. He got remarried. I got laid off from my corporate job. I bought the mobile home, and then I had to declare bankruptcy and gave up the mobile home because I couldn't keep up with all the moving pieces. All of that happened within 1 year's time. So by the time that year was over, I was done. It was just kind of like, all right, where's my white flag? I quit. But clearly that wasn't really an option. But like I said, all of those things together, that was the impetus for me to really start getting serious about who I was and what I wanted. So it's a lot of, kind of that overnight success type of thing that people like to talk about. There is nothing that is overnight about this journey. This is a 10-year process of me taking a risk. And I remember the first time I went to Europe by myself, I was going to attend an Italian destination wedding certificate program. And at the time I was working part-time in the insurance office, and I was still collecting unemployment from having been laid off from this corporate job. So I'm working in a part-time job so that I can be more flexible. I can take my kids to school. I can pick them up in the afternoon, during the custody week that they're with me. And then I worked full-time when they were with their dad. So I have made it work so that I can go on this trip. And of course, everybody is yelling at me, oh, this is such a bad idea, with the exception of my parents. They were excited for me. But, why would you do this? You're not even really active in weddings yet. I mean, I know you've been talking about becoming a wedding planner, but come on, seriously, like, what are you doing? I went anyway. And do you know that the person I roomed with in Verona, how many years ago this was, 2006, 2007, she's, first of all, become a fantastic friend that we have kept in touch with all of this time. She has brought me to Italy not once, but we are planning a second trip specifically to teach and speak to the Italian wedding market about all the things that I've learned from a personal standpoint as being an entrepreneur. I never would have had those opportunities if I hadn't made that risk and gone to this event. That type of thing has happened time and time again. And it's always a level of me being willing to go where some might not. And sometimes when people are saying, no, don't do this, but following my own voice, learning to listen to my gut and learning to trust myself again. And I now have the philosophy that if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. And being able to have that level of trust in my own intuition that, yes, this is something that's going to move me forward, or it's going to be a fantastic experience, memories for me and the kids, or this is a waste of time, or it's not lining up right now, I need to let it go, whatever the case might be. That one thought process alone has been incredibly helpful over the last 10 years.
How did the business of the wedding planning, and I'll call event management, begin to materialize after you got back from that event in Italy?
I had already started before I left, kind of as a part-time type of a thing. I think what's really interesting about being a wedding planner is there's very little barrier to entry. However, there is a very specific process to learn and to get that experience and to obtain that information. We kind of have a tricky thing going on in the industry now where a lot of people are trying to jump in either as planners or photographers without actually having paid their dues, without learning the ropes. And they're handing out business cards and saying, oh, I had so much fun planning my own wedding that now I'm a wedding planner. And that's really just not the right way to go, in my opinion. Having said that, there are 1,000 ways in, so I try to not be judgmental. But, when you're talking about someone's wedding, this is not a risk to take lightly. We certainly want to do everything we can to dot all the I's, cross all the T's, take all the risk out of the planning and out of the performance so that they can be present in that moment. So it was a lot of, to a certain extent, trial and error. A lot of me pursuing internships under other planners in different markets. I think that's incredibly important. But being able to really humble myself and to learn. And I went after all sorts of different categories. I would ask to follow a caterer. I would ask to follow a photographer. I wanted to understand how the wedding worked from each of these different aspects so that as the planner, I could conduct the day from a perspective that would help everyone and really have a team type of approach to it, as opposed to, sometimes you can get into the power struggle of things. So I think there's a lot of moving pieces to that. There's a lot to navigate through, and really you can only read so many books. It's really the doing where the learning happens. And I think that's the case for everything in life. When you're in it, when you are actively engaged, when you're doing the work, that's when you're learning the most.
You described yourself earlier as doing massive amounts of training as a conference junkie, and now you're adding even further context to that of going and getting firsthand experience. And I agree with you completely about just jump in. And that's something that we perfectionists that like to sit and think don't necessarily always feel natural about, right? That because it needs to be up to a certain level as opposed to just jumping in the pool and learning how to swim. But tell me about jumping up onto the stage. So being a conference junkie and learning and to where those tables turned, how did speaking start to fit into your story?
Oh, that's another good question. You've had so many good questions. So I actually started speaking, I don't know, a couple years ago. I don't remember exactly when it was. I think a lot of it came from my experience in going from wanting to build this job in a part-time capacity and wanting that to become the full-time. And it was something that within the industry, nobody was talking about. It was this idea that unless you're full-time, you're not reputable, you're not qualified to be a wedding planner. You really need to be full-time to be taken seriously. Well, what nobody was really talking about is that 90% of the room had this all as their side hustle. They were all working in a corporate job or in some other capacity because the wedding planning industry was so new at that point. So I decided, again, being the contrarian in the room and being the one whom absolutes do not apply, all right, let's talk about it. So that was actually my first segment, was on the idea of burning the candle from both ends, how to jump from building your business part-time on the side while working for someone else into making this a full-time worthy career. So that became the entry point into this world of professional speaking. And I had always known that it's something that I wanted to do. I was hitting where I wanted to be in the sense of, really great feedback from people in the audience and all these really lovely, inspirational, warm, fuzzy stories. They'd come back to me afterwards and they'd say, how such and such changed in their life because of what I said. And of course, that is incredibly ego soothing to have those conversations. But there was a piece of me that I'm like, this is great, but there's something else here, and I just don't know what it is yet. But there is a bigger message in me, and I just have to find out what it is. And I have to say, this is going to sound like a massive plug. I promise you, there is no affiliate link in this whatsoever. I am not getting a dime out of saying this. And I'll say, heroic public speaking is what made such a difference for me in being able to develop my story to really get down again to who I am at the core and what my message is really all about, and then help perfect that and hone that from a performance standpoint. And the way that I found this group of people, it's founded by Michael and Amy Port, was actually, I had never heard of them at all. You know, here he is, a New York Times bestseller like 6 times over. I had no clue who he was. And 2 weeks before the very first live event that they held in Fort Lauderdale a couple years ago, I had an opportunity to be on a webinar that they were hosting. I had just signed a new client. Cash flow was not my friend. So, you know, if I had money, then I would spend it immediately at the stage in the game. So I had just signed a new client whose deposit was the exact amount that the conference registration fees were. At the same time, my father had just taken a new position that was headquartered in Fort Lauderdale. For the exact same weekend, he was already planning a trip to be in the office to meet all of his cohorts. And of course, he and my mom were going to be staying at a nearby hotel. So for me, I took this as the hell yes. You know, all of these pieces are lining up. I'm just hearing about this. There's 2 weeks notice. Here's the exact money that I need. And all of the lodging is already taken care of. And oh, by the way, the kids are already scheduled to be at their dad's that week. So that was the introduction that I had to heroic public speaking. I've gone twice to the live event. I've just completed the graduate training program, and I am going hard after this self-development work. There's a good friend of mine in the program as well who is a trained neuropsychologist. So, I mean, you want to talk about like one of the smartest guys in the room? This is definitely him. He's literally written the book on, brain blocks is the title of his book. So he gets into the psychology of things. We had a conversation about the process that we go through in this graduate level training. And he's like, it feels a lot like therapy. But if I'm going to spend this money, if I'm going to invest the time and energy, I want to do it here because at the end of it, I have a speech. Like it's all still therapy. You're still going through the hard work, but at least you've got something that you can turn around and then share with other people as a result. So everything that they do is with the idea of changing the world one speech at a time. And that resonates with me in such an impactful way.
That leads us to where I would like to take a couple of minutes to maybe conclude this conversation anyway. I feel like we could unpack any one of the items that you've mentioned and probably talk to it for an hour. But the Single Parent Summit, tell me a little bit about how that idea came to be, what it is, and what people can maybe expect out of it.
Absolutely. I am pretty stinking excited about this, I have to say. And again, surprise, surprise, it happened as a result of a conference. I was on my way back from an event that happened in Denver that, again, is a professional speaking type of event. And one of my friends who was taking me back to the airport is another, business coach, and he's in a very similar space. And he said just one sentence that really stuck out to me. He's like, have you ever really thought about specifically teaching the single parent entrepreneur? And my immediate reaction was almost like, kind of keep him at arm's length, emotionally, at least in this conversation, because no, of course not. Why would I want to do that? That's the whole victim mentality. And, that's where everything gets really bad whenever you assign the name single parent to it. I've gotten out of that. I am still a single parent, but I don't think that way. So why would I want to do that? And of course, by the time I woke up the next morning, I realized, oh, wait, there's something about this. It's still here with me. What does that mean? So I reached out to 2 or 3 different people, floated the idea by them, and the response was overwhelming. And what's so funny is that on the way into Denver for this event, I had this sense of like, I just need to clear my calendar. I've got a lot of creative stuff coming up in the fall. I'm speaking in Switzerland, and I've got all these other really fun things happening. So I just need to make some white space so that I can write and I can get all this creativity out. Well, that's not at all how I'm using that white space. Instead, I'm hosting the Single Parent Summit, and it has happened so fast, but it's also been one of those things where it's been maybe not effortless, but there's a certain ease to it that the right people are coming into the mix at the right time. There's such an amazing generosity of spirit in each of the different speakers that are involved. And we have some really amazing people. I mean, tons of again, the New York Times bestseller list author type groups. We've got professional speakers. Most of them either are single parents or they are the product of a single parent family. And or, just that their information is so incredibly practical to a single parent in this new phase of life. So we are looking at basically 4 different categories. You've got the person who's intentionally started a family without being partnered. Clearly, you've got divorce is probably the number one sponsor of single parents, if you will. And then sadly, you've got loss, people who have lost either their husband or their wife, in raising their family. And then 4th, we also have our military vet. And I have a huge soft spot for not only those who serve, but also those who are at the home front and keeping all the pieces moving in the family while their spouse is deployed and protecting the rest of us. So we want to really be able to address each of those 4 different aspects of being a single parent.
Well, I'm really excited to have been asked to be a part of it. I feel like I want to offer that just because of listening to what you've shared about how some of these things have manifested for you and suggestions that you've taken from, and even with the single parent thing. No, why would I want to do that? The main thrust behind the keynote that I give most at the time that we're recording this was born out of something that I resisted when it was shown to me. Was somebody else in the speaking field that I consider a friend and a mentor, that we had a chat, and he said, "May I make a suggestion?" I said, "Sure." And he said, "You're divorced." And I said, "Well, what about it?" And he says, "The fact that you own that but are encouraging the fact that you've moved on from that and you're terrific friends with your former wife and her new husband." And I remember having the same reaction to that you were just describing. I was kind of, almost physically moving backward. What of it? And he said, "Well, who's telling that story? Especially from the male perspective."
So true.
And I resisted it, Tonia. And then I spoke with my sweetheart about it about 2 nights later. She didn't say anything. But the next morning, as she was getting ready to go to work, she stopped me and she said, "Can I talk to you for a second?" I said, "Of course." And she offered, "Do whatever you like. But, so-and-so, you respect him, yeah, and you like him, yeah, and he's been doing this a long time, yeah." She says, "I'm just saying, whatever you do, I'll support you, but I think he's got a point." And then that just manifested into, this goes back into one of your 6 points about the how, not being so worried about that, and I'd have loved to have taken time to unpack that for a perfectionist achiever. How hard has it been to let go of the how? That's another podcast.
Oh my goodness, yes.
But isn't it amazing about how when you can be open, when you know who you are, but you're also willing to say yes and, as you mentioned with the improv, these inspirations and ideas and people just get drawn into your path and the pieces just somehow fit together. And there's almost, it is a safety in let going the absolutes when you can just trust that it'll all come together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny because there's a series that I teach about creativity and how to develop creativity as a muscle that we use every day. And I spell out the word create. Well, the T stands for trust. So I love the way that you just said that. It's the idea that trusting that everything will work out. And there's this beautiful expression, and let's see if I can get it right because I always mix it up. But the idea that all's well in the end. And if it's not well, then it's not the end. And I actually got it right. I'm very proud of myself right now.
Yeah, well, you should be. And you've brought us to the end. I'd keep talking with you, and I'm absolutely not making this up. What I need to do right now while we're recording this is I've got to go and get my kids.
Gotta love it.
So we'll leave that at the end. But again, thesingleparentsummit.com. And, of course, the links to your website and everything that you'll do I'll have with the show notes for this episode. But Tonia, thank you so much. I look forward to many more conversations and I hope collaborations. Who knows where it will go, but as of where we are right now, thank you so much for this time. It's just been a treat.
Oh, my absolute pleasure, Kevin. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful.
You can connect with Tonia online in a variety of ways. Before I mention them, I'm going to spell her last name. Actually, you know what? I'm going to spell her first and her last name for you. So Tonia is Tonia. I bet people misspell that all the time. Tonia is Tonia. And Adleta is Adleta. Tonia Adleta. Last name again, Adleta. Now, this is episode 54 of the No Schedule Man podcast. So if you want to check kevinbulmer.com or noscheduleman.com, just look for episode 54 and all these links are going to be there. But you can connect with Tonia at her website, toniaadleta.com. On Facebook, you can find her at facebook.com/tonia.adleta. And on Instagram, the handle is Tonia Adleta. No dots or dashes or anything like that. Just instagram.com/Tonia Adleta. Also, keep an eye open for the Single Parent Summit coming up in July of 2017. So if you're listening to this episode around the time that it's coming out, the Single Parent Summit is something that is taking place the middle to the end of July in 2017. It's going to be a fantastic 7-day free online event for single parents ready to embrace the colorful chaos. That's a line from Tonia on that site. You can find it at thesingleparentsummit.com. I'm going to be a part of that, giving a version of my keynote, Rise Like a Phoenix, Rise Like a Turtle. I'll tell some of the story about my separation and divorce and being a single parent to my two dads and how that's affected life and career and what I've learned, what I've done right, what I've done spectacularly wrong. But there are a number of reasons why you or other people that you know may enjoy the Single Parent Summit. You'll learn strategies for successful co-parenting, even through divorce. You'll learn how to reframe challenge with resourcefulness and rediscovery. That's my rise like a phoenix and race like a turtle analogy. How to become selfish to become a better parent. How to improve your emotional intelligence, leadership, and a whole lot more. So keep an eye on that, thesingleparentsummit.com. And even if you're listening to this sometime deep into the future, you know, in the year 2043, I can't do the math that quickly, but hopefully the Single Parent Summit is still going on as an annual event. I know that's something that I could definitely have used when I went through my separation and divorce, and I hope it'll help a lot of other people. If you enjoyed this episode with Tonia Adleta, I think you're also really going to like these ones. Episode 49 with Angela Konkin. It's called Step into Life and a New Level of Mind. Her trajectory and her story is very similar to Tonia's. It's episode 49, Step into Life and a New Level of Mind. Also episode 48 on the subject of people-pleasing, which is something that Tonia has mentioned. Amanda Weber also has part of that as her story. It's called The Paradox of People-Pleasing. It's episode 48. And episode 38, listen for that one. Love Yourself First, Know Your Flow with Dr. Carlin Costa. I think you'll enjoy all of those if you liked Tonia's story. You can find those and all other archived episodes of the No Schedule Man podcast on iTunes or at noschedulemanpodcast.com. If you're there, please take a moment to subscribe. Share the episode if you think that somebody else will benefit from hearing some of this content. And by all means, leave a comment, rate it, review it. It all really helps a lot, and I'd love to hear from you and to know what you think. In the meantime, you can reach me at kevinbulmer.com. NoScheduleMan.com will take you to the same place. All my social media channel links are there, as is the sign-up for my email list. I would really like for you to keep in touch, and I do hope that you'll join me on this journey, and please do add your voice to mine. I want to thank you again for taking the time to listen, and thank you for choosing to share part of your day with me. I'm really grateful, and I hope to have you back with me next week as we explore another journey and continue ours with the No Schedule Man podcast.
Just a little deja vu.